Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to try and see if you can actually hear me by standing, just so stay in touch with everybody. We were asked this evening just to give you an update on the district's current situation and a little bit about, and I'm not going to spend a long time talking about how we got here. Obviously, I think that we like to talk about the full equation, which means that since the recession occurred, we've had a significant reduction on the revenue side. We are property tax based. We don't get any additional sales tax or anything like that. And so over the past 4 years, we've had a reduction in revenue about $32 million, which is a pretty significant amount to try and make up. At the same time, everybody started to cut their costs, try and control that. We did exactly the same thing. We went back and looked at all the operating costs, just about everything that you can imagine. Personnel costs, labor costs, got concessions and agreements out of all of our labor groups, reduced salaries, increased some contributions, and I'll talk about that a little bit here in a second. Leverage grants, did everything that you possibly can to try and close that gap. And during that time period, we actually used our reserve fund. Prior to the beginning of the recession, the district had a $25 million reserve fund, zero unfunded liability. And however, over those number of years during the recession, we did use all of our reserve funds in order to maintain services to the community and keep all of our fire stations open. And I want to touch just for a second on why that's important. For me as fire chief, that's very important because we have a very low threshold or baseline as far as our resources go. Right now, we're about 44% of what the recommended industry standards are for staffing and capacity to be able to protect the 600,000 people that we protect. For those that don't know, we run anywhere from Antioch to San Pablo and from Martinez to Concord, if you will. And so Central County, a piece is in the west, and Pittsburgh and Antioch in the east. So it's a very large area, and as the mayor noted, the fact that we're kind of in the middle of that, we do touch everybody. The county has a very strong automatic aid and mutual aid system, but if you take the largest agency out of that mix and start to reduce those resources, the overall county capacity, the overall reliability to share resources is reduced considerably. So that's one of the reasons that that's so important from a county-wide perspective. As I said, I believe we did everything within our powers to reduce our expenses. Finally, January of 11, we had to close one unit, and then this last July we had to de-staff another unit, which means we've gone from 30 companies to 28 companies, but we have been able to maintain staffing in every one of our neighborhood fire stations to date. However, by the end of this fiscal year, we do expend the reserve funds completely, and then we don't have any option other than to reduce those service levels. Right now, it's projected that that could be anywhere from 7 starting, and then when you look at some of the expenses that we don't have any control over, some of the healthcare costs, some of the pension costs, and things like that, starting out with 7 fire stations closing, and then after that, first or second fiscal year, going up to 10 stations closing after that for the foreseeable future. Obviously, when you start talking about reducing an already very low resourced organization by 25–30% of the resources, it starts to really have an impact on our ability to provide service and protection. We know that response times will go up significantly. We know that there will be much more fire spread in the community. Fire is not a single thing. It doesn't just stay in one house. It doesn't stay in one apartment. It doesn't stay in one person's yard. It extends to your neighbor. It extends to the next apartment. The vegetation fire starts to consume homes and things like that. So response time is very critical in our business, and I think most people understand that. But we do expect that that will go up significantly. Our ability to get an effective, what we call an effective firefighting force, which means that we have to have enough units. It's not just when that one unit arrives, it's the fact that it takes multiple units to actually handle a structure fire, to handle a vegetation fire, and be able to do that safely and effectively. So that's going to slow that entire process down, which means we're going to again have bigger fires, we're going to have less chance to be able to positively interact for medical emergencies. We know that if you don't have respirations, if your heart's not beating, if you're not breathing, within 4 to 6 minutes we start to see permanent brain damage. And so all of that has an impact on that. And I think that's really important just to recognize what the consequences are if we don't get some additional revenue. I want to talk, and we've been working to try and make sure that the public's educated, and I think that's really important, is that they are aware of the consequences, they are aware of our efforts to try and reduce costs before we come to them as voters, and that they understand how we got into this situation. So we are trying to educate, we are trying to inform. Local 1230, the union for the firefighters and paramedics, is running a campaign for Measure Q. I just want to mention that we have updated, for those that might not have looked since the beginning, we have updated our 10-year financial projections. Right now, if we were to be successful in the tax measure, we are solvent through the entire period. It is a 7-year sunset on it, and the district is solvent through that entire time period. We have loaded some capital funding for capital improvement, not very much, about $500,000 a year into that 10-year projection, so we're trying to address some of those types of things. But during that projection, we've also taken a very conservative approach to AV growth. We've taken a very conservative approach to, and I know this is probably kind of a sticky subject as far as the mayors and things like that, but to any type of funding that might come back into our system from the dissolution of the RDAs. We know that there'll be a little bit, but we know that it'll be slow and we know it'll be incremental, so we've been very conservative as far as putting that back into the system. And then also on that 10-year projection, we have not calculated any of the savings from the new pension tier. We were in the midst of negotiating a new pension tier with Local 1230 when the governor's reform was passed, and I think we all know that the governor's reform was much more substantial than we were negotiating. So, but we have not calculated that because we don't have the actuarial studies, because some of the legal opinions haven't been finalized and things like that. So when you look at that, you'll see that, again, our projections are, with the tax measure, are solvent through the entire period of the tax, and then we have a 2-year period where we go into red. And if you were to back some of the things out of that projection, we did put some very modest, non-negotiated, some very modest salary increases there, because my chief financial officer thought that going 10 years without plugging anything in there was probably not a good decision, just as far as projections go. So there's some very modest increases in there. There's also the capital, which I mentioned, is plugged in there. And if you were to back even just the raises out, or you to go to a more modest system, that brings that deficit in year 8 and 9 down substantially. It cuts it over in half. So it's pretty significant. There are ways to control that, and we continue to cut expenses, look for ways. I'm going to talk about those a little bit here in a second. So we are working to not only reduce those costs, whether we get a measure or not, we are trying to control that and bring those in line. There's always a question about the structural side. In other words, is this just a tax measure that's going to get you through for a short period of time, and then you run into the exact same problems? I just want to talk a little bit about some of the things that we have done. Our local, all of our personnel have taken a 10% salary cut, which obviously from when that occurred last year forward, substantially reduces our structural expenses. We also have new lower starting steps for firefighters, which again starts to control those costs on the front end. With the county, we're working on the OPEB, unfunded liability, which is being brought down significantly. We're a part of that. Some of our labor groups already are, out of the last contract, are paying additional cost sharing for their medical expenses, so we are working in that area. Obviously, the county in 2011, new employees are not eligible for terminal leave, so that significantly starts to reduce those pension costs as well. And then, as I mentioned, we have not calculated the governor's pension reform, but we believe that that will be substantial as well. I will mention that our firefighters do pay their employees share of their pension costs, as well as subvent the district a substantial amount as well. So I know that everybody has different labor MOUs and things like that, but in our particular case, the firefighters do pay for that already. So with the number of vacancies we have, right now we have about 30. We anticipate, if the measure is going to be successful, we anticipate hiring new people in January under the new pension tier. We know that that is going to, again, we're not only going to see those savings well into the future with that new pension tier, but we will start to realize those savings when those people are hired as well because of the lower benefit package. So I'm available for a few minutes if anybody has any questions or anything like that, but I just wanted to kind of give you an update on where we stand and really how critical not only to the Contra Costa County Fire District, but also to the county, it is to maintain those resources and capabilities for public safety. Thank you.